Victoria Hale grabbed the mop from Ethan Ward's hands and threw it across the marble floor. "You're just a janitor," she said, loud enough for every general, every executive, every camera in the building to hear. "A single dad who cleans toilets. Don't ever speak in my presence again." Ethan said nothing. He bent down to pick up the mop. His sleeve slid up. And the Billionaire CEO saw the tattoo on his wrist and froze. Because that tattoo was a classified military code. And the man she just humiliated was the reason her father came home alive. But she didn't know the worst part yet. Before we continue, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because what this janitor does next will stay with you for days. The alarm went off at 3:47 a.m. Not because Ethan Ward had set it for that time. He hadn't slept at all. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table since midnight, staring at a bill from Lily's school. $1,200 for a field trip deposit, a dental checkup, and new shoes she needed because her old ones had a hole in the left toe that she tried to hide with a marker. He folded the bill and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he stood up, walked to the bathroom, and looked at himself in the mirror. 40 years old, gray around the temples, a scar running from his left ear down to his jaw. The kind of scar people noticed but never asked about, because something in his eyes told them they didn't want to know. His hands were rough, cracked at the knuckles, stained with bleach and floor wax. He put on his gray uniform. The name tag read, E. Ward, Custodial Staff. He stopped at Lily's door. She was 9, curled under a blanket covered in cartoon stars. Her backpack was already packed by the door. She always packed it the night before because she knew her dad left early and she didn't want him to worry. "Love you, kid," he whispered. He locked the front door and walked to his truck, a 2006 Ford Ranger with 290,000 miles, a cracked windshield, and a rear-view mirror held on with electrical tape. He drove 40 minutes in the dark to Sentinel Defense Corporation, the largest private military contractor in the country. A glass and steel tower that cost more to build than Ethan would earn in 10 lifetimes. He parked in the back lot, the one reserved for maintenance workers, delivery drivers, and people the building didn't want visitors to see. He grabbed his mop, his bucket, his cleaning caddy, and he walked through the service entrance. By 5:15 a.m., Ethan Ward was on his knees, scrubbing the marble staircase in the main atrium. This was his life, every day, 5 years straight. And every day he kept his mouth shut about who he really was. The executive floor came alive around 7 a.m. Assistants rushed through hallways, phones rang, coffee machines hissed, and the air changed. It always did when Victoria Hale arrived. She was 32, CEO of Sentinel Defense. Forbes had just profiled her as the most ruthless defense industry leader of her generation. She wore it like a crown. Her heels hit the marble like gunshots, sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Ethan heard her before he saw her. He was mopping the corridor outside Conference Room A, where a delegation of military generals was arriving in 2 hours for a live demonstration of Sentinel's Iron Fire system. Automated fire suppression technology worth $4.3 billion in government contracts. He kept his head down and mopped. Victoria stopped. "You," she said. Ethan didn't look up. "Ma'am?" "Why is this floor still wet? The generals arrive at 9. I specifically said this corridor needed to be finished by 6:30. "I started at 5, ma'am. The staircase marble had—" "I don't care what the staircase had. I care about results. You know what results are, right? Or is that too complicated for someone who pushes a mop? Two of her assistants laughed behind her. A security guard at the end of the hallway looked away. Ethan wrung out the mop. "It'll be dry in 20 minutes, ma'am." "It should have been dry an hour ago." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Let me make something clear. Today is the most important day in this company's history. Generals, senators, defense officials, people who actually matter are walking through this building. If I see one smudge, one streak, one wet footprint on this floor when they arrive, you're gone. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." She stared at him for a moment longer, as if waiting for him to say something else. He didn't. He never did. That was the thing about Ethan Ward. He absorbed everything and reflected nothing. Victoria turned on her heel and walked away. The assistants followed. The corridor fell silent again, except for the soft rhythm of the mop against the marble. Ethan exhaled slowly. His left hand tightened around the mop handle. Beneath the sleeve of his gray uniform, just below the wrist bone, faded black ink pressed against his skin. R9-VIRE-1128. He loosened his grip and kept mopping. At 8:15 a.m., Ethan was assigned to Prep Conference Room A. The room was enormous. A long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, a wall-mounted screen for the Iron Fire demonstration, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything was glass and polish and money. He wiped down the table, vacuumed the carpet, aligned the chairs. He worked quickly and quietly, the way he'd been trained to work, though not by any custodial company. His notebook sat in his back pocket, a small black book, dog-eared and worn, filled with diagrams that didn't look like anything a janitor would draw. Tactical formations, emergency protocols, algorithm sequences written in a tight, precise hand. He'd made the mistake of leaving it on the table while he cleaned the far wall. That's when Victoria came back. She walked in with 3 executives and immediately spotted the notebook on the table. She picked it up. "What's this?" Ethan turned around. His face changed. Just slightly. Just for a half second. A flash of something sharp in his eyes before he locked it down. "That's mine, ma'am. Personal notes." "Personal notes?" Victoria flipped it open. She scanned a page filled with tactical diagrams, fire suppression calculations, military shorthand. She laughed. "Are these military plans? Are you drawing up battle strategies in your spare time?" One of the executives snickered. "Maybe he's applying to the Pentagon." Victoria held the notebook up, showing it to the room. "This is what our custodial staff does during work hours. Fantasizes about being important." Another executive added, "Everyone needs a hobby." Ethan reached for the notebook. "I'd like that back, please." Victoria pulled it away. "I'm not finished. Let me see. What's this? Algorithm sequences? Suppression protocols?" She looked at Ethan with exaggerated amazement. "Are you secretly an engineer? A scientist? A military genius hiding behind a mop?" The room laughed. "No, ma'am," Ethan said quietly. "I just used to serve." "Serve?" Victoria tossed the notebook back to him. He caught it with one hand, the movement fast, precise, instinctive, the kind of reflexes that didn't come from cleaning buildings. Victoria noticed. Her eyes narrowed for just a second before she dismissed it. "Well, serving now means making sure this room is spotless in 30 minutes. Can you handle that? Or should I draw you a diagram?" "I can handle it." "Good, because I'd hate to fire the janitor who thinks he's a soldier." She walked out. The executives followed, still laughing. Ethan stood alone in the conference room, holding his notebook. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was all he allowed himself. Then he opened his eyes, put the notebook back in his pocket, and returned to work. The generals arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, 7 of them, each one decorated, each one carrying the weight of wars fought and decisions made that most civilians would never understand. They filed into Conference Room A with military precision. General Raymond Briggs was the last one through the door. He was 68 years old, a 3-star general with a reputation for being the most no-nonsense officer in the Department of Defense. He'd served in Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He'd buried more soldiers than he could count, and he carried a specific memory, one he'd never been able to shake. December 28, 2011. The Desert Line battlefield. He'd been trapped in a burning command post, enemy fire raining down from 3 directions. The official extraction team had been ordered to stand down. The mission was deemed too dangerous, acceptable losses. He was going to die. He'd accepted it. He was composing a final letter to his wife in his head, when the wall blew inward, and 6 men in black tactical gear pulled him out through fire and smoke and hell. He never learned all their names. The mission was classified at the highest level. 5 of the 6 died. The survivor was listed as killed in action 3 years later. General Briggs had spent over a decade trying to find out who had saved his life. The Pentagon wouldn't give him answers. The files were sealed. All he had was a code. R9-VIRE-1128. A sequence he'd seen tattooed on the wrist of the man who'd carried him out of the fire. Now, as he entered Conference Room A, he saw a man in a gray custodial uniform, finishing the last chair alignment. The man moved with an efficiency that was familiar. Not the efficiency of a janitor, but of someone trained to operate in compressed time under pressure. Briggs sat down. He watched the janitor from the corner of his eye. Ethan felt the general's gaze. He didn't acknowledge it. He picked up his caddy, nodded respectfully to the room, and headed for the door. "Wait," Briggs said. The room went quiet. Generals don't speak to janitors. Ethan stopped. "Sir?" "You missed a spot," Briggs said, pointing to a barely visible smudge near the window. It was nothing, an excuse. "Yes, sir." Ethan walked back, cloth in hand. As he leaned to wipe the window frame, his sleeve rode up 3 inches. Briggs saw it. R9-VIRE-1128. Faded. Black. Burned into skin that was scarred and rough. Skin that had been through fire. Real fire. Briggs stopped breathing. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair so hard his knuckles went white. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Ethan finished wiping the smudge. He pulled his sleeve down. He turned to leave. "Thank you," Briggs said. His voice cracked on the second word. Ethan paused. Something passed between them. A recognition. A knowing. The kind of silent communication that only exists between men who've been in combat together. "You're welcome, sir," Ethan said, and he walked out. Briggs sat frozen in his chair. His aide leaned over. "General, are you all right?" Briggs didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the door where the janitor had just disappeared. Because General Raymond Briggs had just found the man who'd saved his life 12 years ago. And that man was wearing a gray custodial uniform, taking orders from a 32-year-old CEO who had no idea that her father had come home from war because of him. The presentation began at 9:30. Victoria stood at the head of the table, commanding the room the way she always did, with absolute authority and zero warmth. Behind her, the Iron Fire system display glowed on the wall screen. She clicked her remote. "Gentlemen, What you're about to see represents the future of military and civilian fire suppression. The Iron Fire system is Sentinel's proprietary technology. Fully automated, AI-driven, capable of detecting and neutralizing fires in enclosed spaces within 4.7 seconds. She clicked again. Graphs, statistics, testimonials from test facilities. We've invested $600 million in development. Our engineering team has... The screen flickered. Red text flashed. Protocol mismatch. Emberline. Victoria stood at America. Smile didn't falter, but her jaw tightened. Technical glitch. Give us a moment. She signaled to her tech team. 2 engineers rushed to the console, typing frantically. The error repeated. Protocol mismatch. Emberline. What's happening? Victoria hissed at the lead engineer. I don't know, ma'am. The core algorithm keeps rejecting the new interface. It's like the system has built-in safeguards we can't override. Then override harder. We've been trying for 6 weeks, ma'am. There's something embedded in the original code that I don't want excuses. Fix it, now. The generals shifted in their seats. Briggs watched silently. A $4.3 billion contract was slipping through Victoria's fingers in real time. That's when they all heard it. From the corridor, just outside the open door, a quiet voice. Reset at level 3. The Emberline algorithm needs the original calibration sequence. Your engineers are trying to bypass a failsafe that was designed to prevent exactly what they're doing. Every head turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, mop in hand, bucket at his feet. Victoria's face went red. Excuse me? The Emberline protocol, Ethan said calmly. It has a 3-tier safety lock. Your team updated the interface, but didn't recalibrate the core algorithm. That's why it keeps rejecting the input. You need to reset at level 3 and run the original calibration before the new code will integrate. Dead silence. Then Victoria laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was the laugh of someone who'd been embarrassed in front of the most powerful people in her industry and needed someone to bleed for it. I'm sorry, she said, walking toward him. Did you just try to tell my engineering team? A team with combined PhDs from MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon? How to fix a system you couldn't possibly understand? I understand it fine, ma'am. You understand it. Victoria's voice was ice. You push a mop. You clean toilets. You empty trash cans. And you're standing here telling me you understand a $600 million weapons-grade fire suppression system? Yes, ma'am. The executive stared. The general stared. Briggs leaned forward in his chair, his heart hammering. Victoria stepped so close to Ethan that she was looking up into his face. Let me tell you what you understand. You understand bleach. You understand floor wax. You understand your place in this building, which is beneath everyone in this room, literally and figuratively. She reached down and grabbed the mop from his hands. She held it up for the room to see. This is your tool. This is your technology. This is the extent of your contribution to this company and to society. A mop. She threw it across the floor. It clattered against the marble, skidding into the hallway. Now get out of my conference room, and if you ever speak in the presence of my guests again, I will personally make sure you never work in the city, in any capacity, again. The room held its breath. Ethan looked at Victoria. He looked at the mop on the floor. He looked at the screen, still flashing red. Protocol mismatch. Emberline. Then he walked to the hallway, picked up the mop, and returned to the doorway. He looked at Victoria one more time. The system will keep failing, ma'am. Not because your engineers aren't smart. Because the person who wrote that code designed it to fail if anyone tried to remove the safety protocols. It'll crash every time. And people will die in fires that could have been prevented. Victoria's face twisted. Get out. Ethan turned and walked away. General Briggs gripped the table. Every instinct in his body told him to stand up, to call out, to stop this. But the soldier in the janitor's uniform had already disappeared around the corner, and the presentation lurched forward on a system that wouldn't stop bleeding red. Briggs looked down at his own hands, hands that had been pulled from fire by a man who now pushed a mop. And he made a decision. He would find out the truth. Today. No matter what it cost. The presentation stumbled through another 45 minutes. The iron fire system crashed 3 more times. Victoria's engineers scrambled. The generals exchanged glances. A $4.3 billion contract was dying on that screen, and everyone in the room knew it. Victoria kept her composure. Barely. She smiled through clenched teeth, redirected questions, promised software patches and updates. But the damage was done. When the presentation ended, the generals filed out in polite silence. Briggs was the last to leave. He stopped at the door and turned to Victoria. "Miss Hale, one question." "Of course, General." "The iron fire system. Who wrote the original code?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Our engineering team. All patents belong to Sentinel Defense." "Your current engineering team?" "Yes." "The ones who couldn't fix it today?" Victoria's smile tightened. "We're addressing the technical issues, General."
I assure you. Who wrote the original code, Miss Hale?
Something in his tone made her pause. This wasn't a polite question anymore. This was a general conducting an interrogation. "Our records show it was developed in-house, General Briggs. Is there a concern?" Briggs studied her for a long moment. "No concern, just curiosity." He nodded and walked out. But he didn't leave the building. He took the elevator to the ground floor and found the maintenance office, a windowless room in the basement with gray lockers and a schedule board on the wall. An older custodial worker looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for one of your staff. Last name Ward. Ethan Ward." The older man checked the schedule. "Ethan? He's on the 3rd floor, East Wing bathrooms." Briggs nodded. "Thank you." He found Ethan alone in the East Wing, cleaning a bathroom. The general stood in the doorway and watched him work. The precise movements, the straight back, the way he checked corners and cleared spaces like he was sweeping a room for threats, not dirt. "Captain Cross," Briggs said quietly. Ethan's hand stopped moving. His back was to the general. He didn't turn around. "I'm sorry, sir. My name is Ward. Ethan Ward. I'm custodial staff." "Your name is whatever you want it to be, son. But that tattoo on your wrist says R9-VIRE-1128. And I know what that means, because I was the man you pulled out of the fire." Ethan slowly put down the cleaning cloth. He turned around. For the first time, he looked directly at General Briggs. Really looked at him. And Briggs saw the same eyes he'd seen through smoke and flame 12 years ago. "General," Ethan said. Just one word, but it carried everything. "It's you," Briggs whispered. "My God, it's really you. They told me you were dead." "I was," Ethan said. "For a while." Briggs stepped into the bathroom. His eyes were wet. A 3-star general, standing in a corporate bathroom, looking at a janitor who'd saved his life. "Why?" Briggs asked. "Why are you here? Why are you doing this?" Ethan turned back to the sink and started cleaning again. "Because I have a daughter who needs shoes, General, and this job has health insurance." "Ethan, You could have a pension, disability, full military honors. I earned the right to keep a promise, sir. That's what I earned. A promise? To who? Ethan stopped cleaning. He pulled up his sleeve and looked at the tattoo. Faded, scarred, permanent. To the 5 men who didn't walk out of that fire, and to the commanding officer we went in to save. Briggs felt the air leave his lungs. Colonel Hale. Colonel Richard Hale, Victoria Hale's father. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in that building. Heavier than the marble, heavier than the glass, heavier than the billions of dollars flowing through the floors above them. She doesn't know, Briggs said. No, sir. She doesn't know that you saved her father's life. No, sir. She doesn't know that you wrote the code her company is selling. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, sir. And she just threw a mop at you and threatened to end your career. Ethan picked up the cleaning cloth again. She has the right to run her company however she wants, General. My job is to clean the building and keep my promise. Briggs shook his head slowly. What was the promise, Ethan? Ethan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different, lower, rougher, like words being pulled from a place he didn't visit often. The night before Operation Emberline, Colonel Hale called our unit into his tent. He showed us a picture of his daughter, little girl, maybe 6 years old. He said she was going to change the world someday. He made us promise, every one of us, that if something happened to him, we'd make sure his little girl grew up safe. Ethan paused, his hand pressed against his left wrist. 5 men died keeping that promise. I'm the only one left. So I keep it for all 6 of us. Briggs leaned against the wall. He was a man who'd commanded thousands of soldiers, who'd made decisions that determined whether people lived or died. And in this moment, in a bathroom that smelled like bleach, he was completely undone. She needs to know, Ethan. She'll know when she's ready. She's ready now. No, sir, she's not. Because right now, she's the kind of person who throws a mop at a man and calls it leadership. Colonel Hale wouldn't have wanted that. He'd have wanted her to find her way to something better on her own. Briggs pushed off the wall. And if she doesn't? Ethan looked at him with eyes that had seen fire, loss, death, and 12 years of silence. Then I keep cleaning, General. It's what I do. General Briggs didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Ethan Ward had said in that bathroom. The voice, the posture, the way the man held himself, shoulders back, chin level, hands steady, even while holding a toilet brush. That wasn't learned in custodial training. That was muscle memory, carved into bone by years of combat discipline. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. A direct line to a Pentagon records clerk who owed him a favor from Kandahar. Raymond? The voice on the other end was groggy. It's 2 a.m. I need a file, Marcus. Classified. Operation Emberline, December 2011. Desert Line. Silence. Then, Ray, that file is sealed. Top level sealed. You know I can't. I was the man they pulled out of that fire, Marcus. I have a right to know who saved my life. More silence. Briggs could hear breathing on the other end. Give me 24 hours, Marcus said. And Raymond, whatever you find, you didn't get it from me. The line went dead. Briggs set the phone down and looked at his hands again. The same hands that Ethan Ward had grabbed 12 years ago, dragging him through a collapsing doorframe while the world burned around them. He remembered the grip. Iron. Unbreakable. The grip of a man who had decided that death was not an option. And now that man was cleaning toilets for $14 an hour. Briggs closed his eyes. "What have we done to you, son?" he whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Ethan's alarm didn't go off because he'd never set it. He was already awake at 3:30, sitting at the kitchen table, doing what he did every morning, going over Lily's school schedule, checking the budget, calculating how many night shifts he needed to cover the dental bill. Lily padded into the kitchen at 6:15, still half asleep, her hair sticking up on one side. She climbed onto the chair across from him and rested her chin on the table. "Dad?" "Yeah, kid." "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." She studied him with the kind of directness that only 9-year-olds possess. No filters, no politeness, just pure observation. "You were up all night again." "I was thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am to have a kid who notices everything." She smiled. It was her mother's smile, the same one Ethan saw every time he closed his eyes. The smile that had kept him alive in a burning building 12 years ago. Not because his wife had been there, but because the thought of never seeing that smile again had made surrender impossible. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "You just did." "Seriously?" "Seriously, go ahead." Tommy Alcott at school said janitors are losers. He said his dad said that people who clean toilets are people who couldn't do anything better with their lives. Ethan set down his pen. He looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. "What did you say to Tommy?" "I told him my dad is the smartest person I know, and he could do anything he wanted. And he chose to be a janitor because he's not afraid of hard work." "And what did Tommy say?" "He laughed." Ethan nodded slowly. "Did it hurt when he laughed?" "A little." "Good." Lily frowned. "Good? It means you care about the truth enough to feel something when people don't believe it. That's not weakness, Lily. That's integrity. And integrity always costs something." "Is that why you still do it, Dad? Even when people are mean?" Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I do it because every job matters. Every single one. The person who builds the rocket and the person who sweeps the launch pad. They're both part of the mission. One isn't more important than the other. And anyone who tells you different hasn't figured out how the world actually works." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. Then she nodded. "Okay. But Dad?" "Yeah?" "I still think you could be an astronaut if you wanted to." He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep and warm. "Get dressed, kid. Bus comes in 30 minutes. He watched her run back to her room, and the laugh faded from his face. He looked down at his wrist. The tattoo stared back at him. R9-VIRE-1128. He pulled his sleeve down and went to work. At Sentinel, the mood had shifted. Yesterday's failed demonstration had sent shockwaves through the company. Victoria had called an emergency meeting with her senior leadership team at 7 a.m. Ethan knew this because he was mopping the hallway outside the executive boardroom when they started shouting. "The generals are pulling back," said Marcus Webb, Sentinel's chief financial officer. "Briggs's office hasn't returned a single call since yesterday. If we lose this contract, we're looking at a $4.3 billion hole in our projections." "We're not losing the contract," Victoria said. Her voice was controlled, but Ethan could hear the edge underneath, the sound of someone gripping authority with both hands because it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Victoria, the system crashed 4 times during a live demo, in front of 7 generals. That's not a software glitch. That's a credibility crisis. Then we fix the software and rebuild the credibility. Our engineering team has been trying to fix that code for 6 weeks. They can't crack it. There's something embedded in the original architecture, some kind of failsafe. And every time they try to work around it, the system locks up." "Who wrote the original code?" That's what I've been trying to tell you. The documentation is a mess. Your mother acquired the patent 12 years ago from a military contractor. The original author is listed only by initials, E.W. No full name, no contact information, no development notes. Just the raw code and a patent transfer signed by your mother. Ethan stopped mopping. His hand tightened on the handle. E.W. His initials. On a patent that had been stolen from him while he was lying in a military hospital with shrapnel in his spine and burns across his body. He breathed through it. He'd breathed through worse. Find the original author, Victoria said. I don't care what it takes. Hire investigators, pull records, contact the military contractor. Someone wrote this code, and that someone is going to fix it, or I'll sue them into oblivion. Victoria, we don't even know if the original author is alive. Then find out. Because if I go back to those generals with a broken system and no answers, this company is finished. Ethan resumed mopping. Slowly, methodically, the way he did everything. The way he'd cleaned his rifle in the field. The way he'd dressed wounds under fire. The way he'd written the Emberline algorithm in a bunker while artillery shells shook the walls. Because Colonel Hale had looked at him with blood on his face and said, Ethan, if we survive this, I need you to make sure no one ever dies in a fire that could have been prevented. Promise me. And Ethan had promised. He'd written the code in 14 hours straight, by hand, in a notebook identical to the one Victoria had mocked yesterday. He'd submitted it to the Department of Defense after the mission, and when his injuries forced him out of service, his former commanding officer, a man Ethan had trusted, had sold the patent to Sentinel for $2.8 million. Ethan never saw a dime. By the time he found out, he was a single father with a 2-year-old daughter, no income, and a body held together by titanium rods and scar tissue. He couldn't afford a lawyer. He couldn't afford a fight. So he did what he always did. He kept his promise a different way. He got a job at Sentinel. Not as an engineer, not as a consultant, as a janitor. Because a janitor could go anywhere in the building. A janitor could see everything. A janitor could make sure that the code he'd written to save lives wasn't twisted into something that got people killed. For 5 years, that's exactly what he'd done. Around 10 a.m., Ethan was emptying trash cans on the 4th floor when Carl Whitfield found him. Carl was a mid-level engineer at Sentinel. 35, quiet, good at his job, bad at corporate politics. He was the kind of guy who ate lunch alone and stayed late because he actually cared about the work. Hey, Ethan? Yeah? Carl looked both ways down the hallway, then stepped closer. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Ethan tied off the trash bag. I'm always straight. Yesterday, during the demo, you said the Emberline algorithm needed a level 3 reset. You said the engineers were trying to bypass a failsafe. I remember. How did you know that? Ethan picked up the next trash can. Lucky guess. That wasn't a guess. I've been working on that code for 3 months. I couldn't figure out the failsafe architecture. I have a master's degree in systems engineering. And you diagnosed the problem in 5 seconds from the hallway. I read a lot. Ethan, Carl's voice was firm. I found your notebook. Ethan stopped moving. What? You left it in the break room last Tuesday. I picked it up thinking it was a maintenance manual. It's not. Those diagrams, those aren't from any textbook I've ever seen. Those are original suppression algorithms, advanced ones, military grade. Ethan set down the trash bag. He turned to face Carl. Did you tell anyone? No. Are you going to? Carl studied him. That depends on who you are. The two men stood in the hallway, surrounded by the quiet hum of an office building that had no idea a ghost was walking its halls. Ethan looked at Carl and made a calculation. The same kind of calculation he used to make in the field. Risk, reward, trust. I'm nobody, Carl. I'm the guy who cleans the floors. No, you're not. Nobody writes code like that who's nobody. That algorithm in your notebook, it's the same architecture as the Iron Fire core code. The same logic structure, the same notation system. I'd bet my career on it. Then you'd lose your career, or I'd find the answer that nobody else in this building can find. The system is failing, Ethan, not just crashing. Failing in ways that could get people killed. The new code they wrote on top of the original architecture is creating blind spots in the suppression grid. If this system gets deployed the way it is, there will be fires it doesn't catch. People will die. Ethan's expression changed. The easygoing janitor mask slipped, and something harder appeared underneath. The face of a man who'd made a promise about fire and death, and had spent 12 years keeping it. What kind of blind spots? Carl blinked. The shift in Ethan's demeanor was startling. The override protocols. The engineering team rewrote the detection thresholds to reduce response time. Makes the numbers look better for the contract bid. But it cut the sensitivity range by 30%. The system won't detect slow burn fires. The kind that spread through walls. The kind that kill people in their sleep.
They cut the sensitivity to improve the bid numbers. Victoria approved it personally. Faster response time looks better on paper. She didn't understand, or didn't care, that it meant sacrificing detection range. Ethan pressed his palm against his wrist. The tattoo beneath his sleeve seemed to burn. How many systems have been deployed? 14. 7 military installations, 4 hospitals, 3 schools. Schools. Elementary schools, Ethan. 3 elementary schools. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. Full of everything Ethan had spent 12 years trying to prevent. Who knows about the blind spots? I filed a report 6 weeks ago. It was buried. Victoria's office said the sensitivity reduction was within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters. Ethan repeated the words like they tasted rotten. There are no acceptable parameters when children are sleeping in a building that can't detect a fire. I know. That's why I'm talking to you. Because I think you know more about this system than anyone in this building. And I think you've known for a long time. Ethan looked at Carl for a long moment. Then he picked up the trash bag, slung it over his shoulder, and started walking. Ethan, 3rd floor maintenance closet, 15 minutes. Bring your laptop. Carl stared at him. Are you serious? 15 minutes, Carl. And don't tell anyone. Exactly 15 minutes later, Carl opened the maintenance closet door and found Ethan sitting on an overturned bucket with his notebook open on his knee. The closet smelled like cleaning solution and old mops. It was the most unlikely war room in the history of military technology. Close the door, Ethan said. Carl closed it and opened his laptop. I pulled the system diagnostics from this morning's emergency review. Show me the detection matrix. Carl turned the screen toward Ethan. Lines of code scrolled across the display. Ethan scanned them the way a pilot scans instruments. Fast, precise, missing nothing. His finger stopped on a specific line. There, line 4447. They replaced the original gradient detection with a binary threshold. That's why it's missing slow burn fires. The original code used a multi-spectrum analysis. Temperature, smoke density, oxygen displacement, carbon monoxide parts per million.
All 4 indicators had to be monitored simultaneously. Your engineers stripped out 3 of the 4 and left only temperature. Carl stared at him. How do you know the original architecture that specifically? Because I wrote it. The words hung in the air between them. Carl's mouth opened and closed. You wrote the Iron Fire Code? It wasn't called Iron Fire when I wrote it. It was called Emberline. I wrote it in a military bunker in 2011 during a combat operation. I submitted it to the Department of Defense, and when I was discharged due to injuries, someone sold the patent to Sentinel without my knowledge or consent. Someone. Victoria's mother signed the purchase order. Carl sat down slowly on a stack of paper towel packages. You've been working here as a janitor for 5 years. The man who wrote the code that this entire company is built on has been cleaning our floors. The code is the least important thing I've been doing here, Carl. What do you mean? I mean that for 5 years, every time your engineering team has tried to cut corners on safety, I've been the one submitting anonymous reports to federal regulators. Every time a contractor has used substandard materials, I've been the one leaking the information to inspectors. I've been the reason Sentinel has passed every federal safety audit. Not because your company does the right thing, but because someone in a gray uniform has been making sure the right thing gets done anyway. Carl let out a long breath. You're the whistleblower, the anonymous source that's been driving Victoria crazy for years. I'm the janitor, Carl. I just happen to take my job very seriously. Ethan, this changes everything. If you're the original author, you can fix the system. You can restore the detection protocols. You can save... I can save the people sleeping in those schools. Yes, I know. Then why haven't you done it already? Ethan closed his notebook. He looked at Carl with an expression that held 12 years of patience and pain and promise. Because fixing the code isn't enough. The code was fine. The problem isn't the technology, Carl. The problem is the person running the company. If I fix the code today, Victoria will override it tomorrow to hit her contract numbers. The only way to fix this permanently is to change the way this company thinks about human life. And how do you do that? I don't know yet. But I know it starts with the truth. And I know the truth has a way of coming out when it's ready. Carl looked at the man sitting on an overturned bucket in a maintenance closet. The man who'd written code worth billions, who'd saved generals in combat, who carried shrapnel in his spine and burns across his body, and who still showed up every morning at 5 a.m. to mop floors and protect people who had no idea he existed. What do you need from me? Carl asked. I need you to document everything. Every safety override, every threshold reduction, every memo where Victoria or her team approved changes that compromised detection capability. Dates, names, authorization codes, everything. And then what? And then we wait for the right moment. Because the truth isn't a weapon, Carl. It's a mirror. And the only thing harder than seeing yourself in that mirror is being the person holding it up. Carl nodded. He closed his laptop and stood. I'll have everything documented by end of week. Carl? Yeah? Thank you for noticing the notebook, for caring enough to ask questions. Most people in this building walk past me like I'm furniture. Carl opened the closet door. Ethan, most furniture didn't save people's lives in combat. I'll see you Friday. The door closed. Ethan sat alone in the maintenance closet, surrounded by mops and cleaning supplies, and the ghosts of 5 soldiers who died in a fire 12 years ago, so that a colonel's daughter could grow up and build a company that was now putting children at risk. He looked at his wrist. R9-VIRE-1128.
"I'm still here," he whispered. "I'm still keeping the promise." Then he stood up, grabbed his mop, and went back to work. Because the fourth-floor hallway wasn't going to clean itself, and Ethan Ward had never left a job unfinished. At 6 p.m., he clocked out, drove 40 minutes home, and found Lily at the kitchen table doing math homework. She looked up when he walked in. "Dad, you smell like bleach."
"That's the smell of honest work, kid." "It's the smell of bleach, Dad." He laughed and kissed the top of her head. "How was school?" "Tommy Alcott apologized." "He did?" "His mom made him. She said what he said about janitors was disrespectful." "Smart woman." "Dad?" "Yeah?" "I don't care what anyone says. You're my hero." Ethan stood in the kitchen of his small house, his daughter's arms wrapped around his waist, the smell of bleach on his uniform, and the weight of a secret on his shoulders that could bring down a billion-dollar company. And in that moment, holding his daughter, he knew exactly why he kept going. Not for recognition, not for money, not for justice. For her. For the promise. For the 5 men who never came home. He held her tighter and said nothing, because some promises don't need words. They just need someone stubborn enough to keep them. Friday came faster than Ethan expected. Carl met him in the maintenance closet at 6:45 a.m., before anyone else on the engineering floor had arrived. He had a flash drive in his hand and dark circles under his eyes. "It's worse than I thought," Carl said. "How much worse?" 14 deployed systems. I checked every single one. The detection blind spots aren't just theoretical. 3 of the hospital installations have already logged anomalous readings. Slow temperature rises that the system didn't flag. Nothing caught fire yet, but it's only a matter of time. The schools? Same issue. Worse, actually. 2 of the 3 school systems were installed in buildings with older HVAC infrastructure. If a slow burn fire starts inside the walls, wiring, insulation, anything, the iron fire system won't catch it until there's visible flame. By then, the building is already full of smoke. Ethan took the flash drive. His hand was steady, but his jaw was tight. "You documented everything? Dates, authorization codes, who signed off?" "Every single override. Victoria personally approved 7 of the 14 sensitivity reductions. Her name is on the memos. I also pulled the original installation reports, the ones Sentinel filed with the Federal Safety Board. They list the original detection parameters, the ones that were active before the engineering team changed them. So there's a paper trail showing that Sentinel certified one set of safety standards and then quietly downgraded them after installation." "Exactly. And Ethan, the contract with the generals? The one Victoria was pitching? She's planning to use the same reduced parameters for the military deployment. Faster response time on paper, but the same 30% blind spot in detection." Ethan put the flash drive in his pocket. He looked at Carl. "You understand what happens if this comes out. Victoria loses the contract. The stock tanks. Sentinel faces federal investigation. People get fired. People including you." Carl was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened up. "My daughter goes to one of those schools, Ethan. Lincoln Elementary, 2nd grade. She sits in a classroom every day in a building that your system is supposed to protect. Except it's not your system anymore. It's a gutted version that might not save her if something goes wrong." Ethan nodded. "Then you know why this matters." "I know why it matters. What I don't know is what you're planning to do about it." "I'm going to give Victoria a chance to fix it herself. And if she doesn't? Then the truth comes out. All of it." Carl left the closet first. Ethan waited 2 minutes, then followed with his mop and bucket. To anyone watching, It was just the janitor starting his shift. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed. But someone was watching. General Briggs had arrived at Sentinel 40 minutes early and had been sitting in the lobby, waiting. Reason given. Credit for Operation Emberline should belong to the 5 men who gave their lives. Ward stated he was not a hero, merely the one who survived. Request approved. Briggs had read those 8 pages 4 times. Each time his chest got tighter. And now he sat in the Sentinel lobby, watching a man in a gray custodial uniform push a mop across the floor. A man the Pentagon had declared dead. A man who'd written technology worth billions. A man who'd saved a general's life and a colonel's future. And he felt something he hadn't felt since the day he was pulled from the fire. Shame. Not for himself, for a country that let its heroes disappear. At 11 a.m., Victoria called an all-hands meeting in Conference Room A. The Iron Fire demonstration had been rescheduled for Monday. The generals had agreed to give Sentinel one more chance, largely because Briggs had quietly intervened, though Victoria didn't know that. "I need this room prepped and perfect by noon," Victoria told her assistant. "And get the custodial staff in here now. I want every surface spotless." Ethan was sent in. He cleaned the table, the windows, the floor. Victoria stood at the head of the room, reviewing her notes, ignoring him the way she always did, the way everyone always did. Then she noticed his notebook sticking out of his back pocket. "Didn't I tell you to stop bringing your little fantasy journal to work?" Ethan kept wiping the table. "It's just notes, ma'am." "Notes about what? Your imaginary military career?" She held out her hand. "Give it to me." "I'd rather not, ma'am." "That wasn't a request." Ethan stopped cleaning. He looked at her. For just a second, 1 second, something flickered in his expression. Not anger. Something older and sadder. The look of a man who'd carried someone's secret for 12 years and was tired of the wait. He handed her the notebook. Victoria flipped through it, scanning pages of algorithms, tactical formations, and emergency protocols. She stopped on a page that had a diagram she recognized. The core architecture of the Iron Fire system. Her hand froze. "What is this?" "My notes." "This is the Iron Fire architecture. This is our proprietary system." "It wasn't always yours." Victoria looked up from the notebook. Her eyes were sharp. "What did you say?" "I said it wasn't always yours, ma'am. That system had a different name before Sentinel bought the patent." "How would you know anything about our patent history?" Ethan held her gaze. "Because I was there when it was written." The room went very still. Victoria's assistant stopped typing. The 2 engineers who'd come in for the meeting prep looked up from their laptops. You were there? Victoria repeated. You? The janitor? Were there when the Iron Fire Code was written? Yes, ma'am. In what capacity? Were you sweeping the floor of the lab? I was in a bunker, in the desert, under enemy fire. I wrote it by hand, in a notebook, just like this one, while a man I respected bled out 10 feet away from me. Victoria stared at him. Then she laughed, short, hard, dismissive. That's enough. I don't know what kind of delusion you're operating under, but this conversation is over. Give me one good reason I shouldn't fire you right now for wasting my time and making insane claims about company property. Discipline, Ethan said quietly. What? Discipline is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Your father said that. He said it the night before he almost died. Every molecule of air left the room. Victoria's face went white. Her hands dropped to her sides. The notebook slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silence. What did you just say? Your father, Colonel Richard Hale. He said those words to 6 men in a tent in the desert, the night before Operation Emberline. I was one of those men. You're lying. I'm not lying, ma'am. I've never lied to you. I just never told you the truth. Victoria's breathing changed, faster, shallow, her chest rising and falling like she was running. My father served in the military. He was rescued by... The details were classified. He never talked about it. How could you possibly know? Because I was the one who carried him out. The door to the conference room opened. General Briggs walked in. He'd been standing in the hallway, listening. He couldn't wait any longer. He's telling the truth, Miss Hale. Victoria spun around. General Briggs, what are you... I received the classified file on Operation Emberline last night. Captain Ethan Ward, Reaper 9 Special Operations Unit. He led a 6-man team into a burning command post to rescue your father on December 28, 2011. 5 men died. Captain Ward carried your father out through enemy fire with burns covering 60% of his body. He spent 18 months in military hospitals. He declined a full military pension. He asked to be listed as killed in action so the credit would go to his fallen teammates. Victoria shook her head. No, that's... Our records show the rescue team was... Your records show what the Pentagon wanted them to show. Captain Ward's survival was classified because the mission itself was classified. As far as the official record is concerned, he died with his team. Victoria turned back to Ethan. She looked at him. Really looked at him, for the first time since he'd started working in her building. The gray uniform, the rough hands, the scar running from his ear to his jaw, the way he stood, straight, centered, balanced. Not like a man who cleaned floors, but like a man who'd been trained to enter rooms and control them. Show me, she whispered. Show you what? The tattoo. The one I've seen on your wrist. Show me. Ethan hesitated. Then slowly, he rolled up his left sleeve. R9-VIRE-1128. Faded black ink on scarred, burned skin. The letters and numbers were distorted by scar tissue, by fire that had tried to consume his body and failed because the man underneath refused to stop moving. Briggs stepped forward. R9 is the unit designation for Reaper 9. VIRE stands for Valor in Real Engagement, the operation's code phrase. 1128 is the date, November 28th, the day Captain Ward made a promise to your father. What promise? Victoria's voice was barely audible. Ethan rolled his sleeve back down. The night before the mission, your father called our unit together. He showed us a picture of you. You were 6 years old. You were wearing a purple dress, and you were smiling so big it looked like your face would break. He said, "This is my daughter. She's going to change the world someday." And he made every one of us promise that if he didn't come home, we'd make sure his little girl grew up safe. Victoria's hand went to her mouth. 5 men died keeping that promise, ma'am. 5 good men who never got to go home to their own families. I'm the only one left. So I keep the promise for all 6 of us. That's why you're here, Victoria whispered. That's why you took a janitor's job at my company. I took the job because I promised your father I'd watch over you, and because the code I wrote, the code your company sells as the Iron Fire system, was being changed in ways that could get people killed. I needed to be close enough to stop it. Victoria sat down. Her legs simply gave out, and she dropped into the nearest chair. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't grip the armrest. You wrote the Iron Fire code. I wrote the Emberline algorithm, in a bunker, while your father was being stabilized by our medic. I wrote it because he grabbed my hand and said, "Ethan, promise me. No one else dies in fires. Promise me." And I promised. The patent. My mother bought it. Your mother bought it from my former commanding officer, who sold it without my knowledge while I was in a hospital bed learning how to walk again. I never saw the money. I never authorized the sale. But the patent wasn't why I came here. Then why? Because 3 years ago, your engineering team started cutting the safety protocols I built into the code. They reduced detection sensitivity by 30% to improve your contract numbers. Right now, there are 14 Iron Fire systems deployed across this country, in hospitals, in military bases, in schools, that cannot detect slow-burn fires, and you signed off on every single one of those reductions. The color drained from Victoria's face. I was told the modifications were within acceptable parameters. There are no acceptable parameters when children are sleeping in buildings that can't detect a fire, ma'am. Briggs spoke. He's right, Miss Hale. And if this comes to light, which it will, because the Federal Safety Board has been receiving anonymous reports about your systems for years, Sentinel won't just lose the military contract. You'll face criminal negligence charges. Victoria looked at Briggs. Anonymous reports? The general looked at Ethan. Victoria followed his gaze. Understanding hit her like a physical blow. You've been the whistleblower. I've been keeping my promise. You've been sabotaging my company. I've been protecting the people your company is supposed to serve. There's a difference. Victoria stood up. Her face was a war. Anger, shame, fear, grief, all fighting for control. You could have told me. At any point in the last 5 years, you could have walked into my office and told me who you were. You could have said, I wrote your code. Your father was my commanding officer. Your safety systems are failing. Why didn't you? Ethan looked at her with an expression that held no anger, no resentment, no self-pity. Just the infinite patience of a man who'd been waiting for this exact moment for 12 years. Would you have listened? Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Would you have listened to the janitor, ma'am? The man who pushes a mop? The man you told not to touch things he doesn't understand? Would you have sat down and heard me out? Or would you have had security escort me from the building? Victoria said nothing, because they both knew the answer. Ethan reached into his jacket, the gray custodial jacket that smelled like bleach and floor wax, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, creased 100 times, protected by a plastic sleeve. Your father gave me 2 things the night before the mission. The first was a kindergarten drawing. He unfolded the paper. A crayon drawing. A tall figure in green, holding hands with a small figure in purple. Above them, in shaky, 6-year-old handwriting, "My hero." Victoria let out a sound that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a cry. It was the sound of something breaking inside her that she didn't know could break. "I drew that," she said. "I drew that when I was 6. I gave it to him before his deployment. He kept it?" "In his helmet, every single day. He said it was his armor." Victoria took the drawing with both hands. Tears were streaming down her face now, falling onto the table, onto her designer suit, onto the billion-dollar conference room that suddenly felt very small and very cold. "You said 2 things," she whispered. "What was the second?" Ethan reached into his jacket again and pulled out an envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was careful and deliberate. "For my daughter, when she's ready." He wrote this the night before Operation Emberline. He gave it to me and said, "If I don't make it home, deliver this when she's old enough to understand what it means." Victoria took the envelope. Her hands shook so violently she could barely open it. She unfolded the letter and began to read. The room was silent. Briggs stood near the door with tears running down his weathered face. Victoria's assistant had her hand pressed over her mouth. The 2 engineers stared at their shoes. Victoria read aloud, her voice cracking on every other word. "My dearest Ava." She stopped. "He called me Ava. Nobody knows he called me that. It was his name for me." She continued. "My dearest Ava, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. But it also means Daniel kept his word. The man giving you this letter is the bravest soldier I've ever known. Not because he's fearless, but because he's terrified and does the right thing anyway." She stopped again. Her chest heaved. She pressed the letter against her heart and closed her eyes. "Keep reading," Ethan said softly. "He wanted you to hear all of it." Victoria opened her eyes and looked back at the letter. "When you're old enough to run companies and change the world, remember that the janitor mopping your floors might be the most important person in the building. Honor the people who serve without recognition. That's what real valor means. Not the glory, not the medals, not the stock price. It means doing your job when everything around you is falling apart and nobody's watching." She looked up at Ethan. He knew. He knew he might not come back. He was prepared for everything except leaving you behind. "And you kept this letter for 12 years. "I keep my promises, ma'am. All of them." Victoria set the letter down on the conference table. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked around the room, at the marble and glass and money, at the general's empty chairs, at the screen that still showed the Iron Fire logo. "I called you a janitor," she said quietly. "I threw your mop across the floor. I told you that your contribution to society was cleaning toilets. And you saved my father's life. You wrote the code that this company is built on. You've been protecting people from my own mistakes for 5 years." "Yes, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am." Old habit. Victoria wiped her face with both hands. She stood up and walked to where Ethan stood. She was a foot shorter than him. She had to look up to meet his eyes. "What does my father's letter say I should do?" "It says you should honor the people who serve." "How? How do I fix this?" Ethan looked at her, not as a janitor looks at a CEO, not as a soldier looks at a commanding officer, but as one human being looks at another who is standing at the edge of who they've been and who they could become. You fix the systems, all 14 of them. You restore the original detection parameters. You tell the generals the truth about the sensitivity reductions. You accept the consequences. And you start running this company the way your father would have run it. And if I lose the contract? If the board fires me? If Sentinel collapses? then at least you'll know that no child died in a fire because you chose profits over their life. General Briggs stepped forward. Miss Hale, I've seen a lot of people face hard choices in my career. Commanders who had to decide between the safe option and the right option. Your father was one of those people. He chose to stay in a burning command post to get his men out first.
That's why he needed rescuing. He could have left. He chose to stay.
Briggs looked at Ethan, and Captain Ward could have stayed down when the building collapsed on him. He chose to get up, on fire, carrying your father on his back, and walk through hell. The general turned back to Victoria. Now it's your turn to choose. What kind of fire are you willing to walk through? Victoria looked at the kindergarten drawing on the table. A tall man in green. A little girl in purple. My hero. She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. Cancel my afternoon. Get the board on a conference call in 1 hour. And pull every installation report for the iron fire system. All 14. She hung up and looked at Ethan. I'm going to fix this. I don't know how yet. I don't know if the company survives. But I'm going to fix it. Ethan nodded. Your father would be proud to hear that. Don't leave, she said. Please. I'm going to need your help. I'm the janitor, Miss Hale.
I'm always here. You're not the janitor anymore.
Yes, I am. And that's exactly why you need me. Because the day I stop being willing to clean up messes is the day I stop being useful. Victoria stared at him. Then she did something nobody in Sentinel Defense Corporation have ever seen her do. She extended her hand. Ethan looked at it. The hand of the woman who'd thrown his mop, mocked his notebook, called him a failure, threatened his livelihood, and unknowingly benefited from his sacrifice every single day of her life. He shook it. Firm. Steady. The handshake of two people who were finally, after 12 years, standing on the same side. Briggs watched from the doorway, his hand pressed against his chest. He'd spent a career giving orders, leading troops, and making decisions that shaped the course of wars. But standing in this conference room, watching a janitor and a billionaire shake hands over a crayon drawing and a dead man's letter, he understood something he'd missed for 68 years. The bravest thing a soldier can do isn't charge into fire. It's stand in a room full of people who look down on you and refuse to let go of who you are. Ethan picked up his mop from the corner where he'd left it. He turned toward the door. Where are you going? Victoria asked. The fourth-floor bathrooms aren't going to clean themselves. He walked out. General Briggs stepped aside to let him pass. As Ethan moved down the hallway, the fluorescent lights caught his left wrist. R9-VIRE-1128. Still there. Still burning. Still keeping count. The board call lasted 3 hours. Victoria sat alone in her office with the door locked, her phone on speaker, and her father's letter spread open on the desk in front of her. She told them everything. The sensitivity reductions, the 14 compromised systems, the blind spots that couldn't detect slow burn fires, the schools, the hospitals, the military installations. She told them about the anonymous reports that had been going to federal regulators for years, and that she now knew who had been sending them. She did not tell them about Ethan. Not yet. That part she kept for herself, because she wasn't ready to say it out loud to people who measured everything in dollars. The board reacted exactly the way she expected. You're telling us we have a $4.3 billion contract on the line, and you want to halt deployment? That was Richard Phelps, chairman, a man who'd never met a profit margin he didn't worship. I'm telling you, we have 14 systems in the field that can't do what we promised they'd do. If a fire kills someone in one of those buildings, and it comes out that we knew about the detection gaps, we're not looking at a lost contract. We're looking at prison.
The modifications were within acceptable parameters. My engineering team certified what I told them to certify, Richard. I signed off on the reductions. My name is on the memos. If this goes to court, I'm the one who goes down. Silence on the line. Board members calculating. Not morality, but liability. What are you proposing? Phelps asked. Full recall. All 14 systems. We restore the original detection parameters, recertify every installation, and disclose the modifications to the Federal Safety Board voluntarily before they find out on their own. That will cost, I know what it will cost. It will cost less than a dead child on the evening news, with our logo in the background. More silence. Then Phelps spoke again, his voice careful. Victoria, this kind of decision needs to be made with full board approval. We can't just, I'm not asking for approval, Richard. I'm informing you. The recall begins Monday. If the board wants to fire me for it, that's your right. But I will not sit in this chair and wait for someone to die because I was afraid of losing money. She hung up before they could respond. Then she sat in the silence of her office, staring at her father's letter, and realized she had no idea what to do next. She'd spent her entire career being certain she was right, certain she was in control, certain that the people below her on the corporate ladder were below her in every way that mattered. Now she was holding a crayon drawing that proved she'd been wrong about everything. She picked up the phone and called the front desk. I need the personnel file for Ethan Ward, custodial staff. The file arrived in 10 minutes. It was thin. Name, Ethan Ward. Age, 40. Emergency contact, Lily Ward, daughter. Previous employment, night shift driver, warehouse worker, part-time mechanic. Education, listed as high school diploma. No mention of military service. No mention of combat experience. No mention of a classified operation that had saved her father's life and produced the technology her entire company was built on. She opened her mother's old files next, the ones she'd inherited when she took over Sentinel 3 years ago. She'd never looked through them carefully. Her mother had died of cancer when Victoria was 28, and going through her papers had felt like picking at a wound. Now she picked. She found it in a folder labeled Acquisitions, 2012. A patent transfer agreement for something called the Emberline Safety Protocol. Purchase price, $2.8 million. Seller, Major Thomas Griggs, U.S. Army, retired. Buyer, Sentinel Defense Corporation. Authorized by Margaret Hale, CEO. Her mother. Victoria read the agreement twice. The original inventor was listed only by initials, E.W., with a note that read, Inventor currently hospitalized. Transfer authorized by commanding officer under military power of attorney. Military power of attorney. A legal instrument that allowed a commanding officer to make decisions on behalf of an incapacitated soldier. Ethan had been lying in a hospital bed, learning to walk again, and his commanding officer had sold his life's work out from under him for $2.8 million that Ethan never saw. Victoria closed the file. Her hands were trembling again. She thought about all the times she'd stood on conference stages, talking about Sentinel's innovative engineering team. All the interviews where she'd taken credit for the Iron Fire system. All the Forbes profiles and industry awards. Built on stolen work. Built on the back of a man who was mopping her floors. She thought about the mop she'd thrown across the marble. She put her head in her hands and cried. Not the composed, dignified tears of a CEO maintaining her image. The ugly, shaking, gasping kind of crying that comes when you realize you've become the person you never thought you'd be. At 7 p.m., when the building was mostly empty, Victoria took the elevator to the basement. She walked past the boiler room, past the storage units, past the loading dock, and found the maintenance break room. It was small. A folding table, a few plastic chairs, a microwave with a cracked door, a coffee maker that looked older than she was. On the wall, someone had pinned a handwritten sign. "Clean up after yourself. Nobody else will." Ethan's locker was in the corner. Number 14. She didn't open it. She just stood in front of it, staring at the dented metal and the strip of masking tape with his name written in black marker. E. Ward. She thought about her own office, the mahogany desk, the leather chair, the view of the city skyline. She thought about the difference between the two spaces and what each one said about the person who occupied it. Then she left the building, got in her car, and drove to the address listed in Ethan's personnel file. It took 45 minutes. The neighborhood was working class. Small houses with chain-link fences, pickup trucks in driveways, basketball hoops bolted to garage doors. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' names, and nobody locked their front doors. She found the house, a small white bungalow with a porch light on, and a bicycle leaning against the railing. She parked across the street and sat in her car for 10 minutes, trying to figure out what she was going to say. Then she saw him. Ethan was kneeling in his neighbor's driveway, a wrench in his hand, working on what looked like a broken water spigot. An elderly man stood over him, holding a flashlight. "I think the washer's gone, Mr. Kowalski," Ethan said. "I've got a spare at home. Give me 5 minutes." "Ethan, you don't have to. It can wait until—" "It'll take 5 minutes. If it sits overnight, you'll have a flood by morning." "At least let me pay you." "You can pay me by not falling off that ladder next time you clean your gutters. Use the extension pole I got you." "That thing's too complicated." "It's a pole with a brush on the end, Mr. Kowalski. It's not complicated." The old man laughed. Ethan disappeared into his house and came back with a small rubber washer. He had it installed in under 3 minutes. The spigot stopped dripping. "Good as new." "Thank you, son. You're a good man." "I'm a man with a wrench, Mr. Kowalski. That's all." The old man went inside. Ethan stood up and wiped his hands on his work pants. That's when he saw the car across the street, and Victoria sitting inside. He walked over. She rolled down the window. "You're a long way from the executive floor, Miss Hale." "I read my mother's files." Ethan leaned against the car door. "And?" "She bought the patent from your commanding officer, Major Thomas Griggs. He used a military power of attorney to authorize the sale while you were in the hospital." "I know." "You knew the whole time?" "I found out after I was discharged. By then I had a newborn daughter, no income, and a body that could barely walk. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Couldn't afford a fight. So you just let it go?" "I let the patent go. I didn't let the promise go. Those are different things." Victoria got out of the car. She stood in front of him on the sidewalk, the billionaire CEO in her designer clothes, standing in a working-class neighborhood at 8 o'clock at night, looking at a man in stained work pants who had more reason to hate her family than anyone alive. Why didn't you sue? Even later, when you had time, when you could have found a lawyer willing to take the case on contingency. The patent is worth billions. You could have what? Spent 10 years in court, dragged your father's name through the media, forced Lily to grow up with a dad who was consumed by a legal battle instead of being present for her? You had every right. I had every right to be angry. I was angry, for a long time. But anger doesn't fix water spigots, and it doesn't keep promises, and it doesn't raise a little girl into someone good. So I let it go. Victoria leaned against the car beside him. They stood side by side in the dark, two people from opposite ends of the world, connected by a dead colonel
and a burning building, and a promise made 12 years ago. "The kindergarten drawing," Victoria said. "He really kept it in his helmet?" "Every day. He said it was the only armor that mattered." "I don't remember making it. I mean, I know I did. I recognized it when you showed me. But I don't remember the moment. I just remember him leaving."
I remember standing at the window and watching his car drive away and thinking he'd be back in a few days. He was gone for 11 months. Longest 11 months of my life. I was 6, and I thought a month was forever. She paused. "What was he like? Over there?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He was the best officer I ever served under. Smart, calm, the kind of leader who made you feel like you were part of something bigger than yourself. When things got bad, and they got bad a lot, he'd find a way to make you laugh. He'd tell these terrible jokes, just awful, and everyone would groan and he'd grin like he'd won an Oscar." Victoria laughed. It surprised her. "He still does that, the terrible jokes. Mom used to say his sense of humor was a war crime." She wasn't wrong. They were quiet again. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A porch light flickered. "He never told me about Emberline," Victoria said. "He never talked about being rescued. I knew he served. I knew he was in dangerous situations. But he never gave me details. He wouldn't have. Men like your father, they don't talk about the moments that almost killed them. They talk about the moments that kept them alive. That's why he talked about you." "Me?" "Every chance he got. My daughter's going to change the world." That was his favorite line. He must have said it 1,000 times. Victoria pressed her palms against her eyes. "I haven't changed the world. I've been running a company that steals from wounded soldiers and puts children at risk." "You didn't know." "I should have known. I should have asked better questions. I should have looked at the people in my building, all of them, not just the ones in suits, and treated them like human beings." "You're asking now. That counts for something." The front door of the house opened. Lily stepped onto the porch. "Dad? Who are you talking to?" Ethan straightened up. "Just a friend from work, kid. Go back inside. I'll be there in a minute." Lily looked at Victoria with curious eyes. "Are you the lady who throws mops?" Victoria flinched like she'd been slapped. "Lily," Ethan said firmly. "Inside. Now." "It's okay," Victoria said quickly. "She's right. I am the lady who throws mops." Lily studied her for another second, then went back inside. Through the window, Victoria could see the girl sit at the kitchen table and open a textbook. "She heard about that?" Victoria asked. "She hears everything. Kids always do." "I'm sorry, Ethan. For the mop, for the notebook, for every single thing I said to you in that building. I'm sorry." "I appreciate that. But it's not enough." "No, it's not. But it's a start." Victoria pushed off the car. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I brought you something. The original patent agreement. I had my legal team draft a transfer of ownership. If you sign it, the Emberline patent reverts to you. Full rights, retroactive royalties, everything." Ethan looked at the folder, but didn't take it. "I don't want the patent." "It's yours. It was always yours." "I don't want the money, Miss Hale. I never did." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to fix the systems. All 14. I want you to restore the original detection parameters so that the next time a fire starts in a school at 2 a.m., the system catches it before any child breathes smoke. That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted." "I already ordered the recall. Full restoration. Every system." "I know. Carl told me." Victoria blinked. "Carl Whitfield? The engineer?" "He's a good man. He's been documenting the safety issues for weeks. He came to me because his daughter goes to one of those schools. Lincoln Elementary. 2nd grade. She sits in a classroom every day under a system that I wrote to protect her, and that your company broke to save money. Carl understood what that meant. He didn't look away. Victoria nodded slowly. I'll make sure he's protected. No retaliation. Good. He deserves better than what most people in your building get. Victoria put the folder on the hood of her car. The patent offer stands. Whenever you're ready. No expiration. I won't be ready. Then it'll wait forever. I owe you that much. I owe you a lot more than that. She got in her car, then paused with the door open. Ethan, Monday morning. The generals are coming back for the rescheduled demonstration. Will you be there? I'll be there at 5, same as always. I mean in the room, not mopping the hallway. In the room. Ethan considered this. I'll think about it. Please think about it seriously. The system needs you. I need you to. I need someone in that room who will tell me the truth, even when I don't want to hear it. You've had that person in your building for 5 years, Miss Hale. You just didn't know where to look. Victoria nodded. She closed the door and started the engine. Through the windshield, she saw Ethan walk back to his porch, open the front door, and disappear inside. She sat in the car for another minute, looking at the small white house with the porch light on and the bicycle leaning against the railing. The house where a decorated war hero lived in anonymity, raised his daughter alone, and kept a 12-year promise to a dead man. Then she drove home to her penthouse apartment, which suddenly felt too big, too empty, and too clean. Inside the house, Ethan locked the front door and found Lily still at the kitchen table. She'd closed her textbook and was watching him. Dad? Yeah, kid? That lady seemed sad. She is sad. Why? Because she just found out that she's been hurting people without knowing it. And finding out you've hurt people, that's one of the worst feelings in the world. Is she going to fix it? I think so, yeah. I think she's going to try. Good. Lily paused.
Dad,
Yeah?
are you sad?
Ethan sat down at the table across from her. He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, her mother's smile, her father's stubbornness, and the wall he'd been holding up for 12 years cracked. Not a big crack, not a collapse, just a hairline fracture that let something through that he'd been keeping behind it for a very long time. Yeah, kid, I'm a little sad. Because of the mop lady? No, because I miss my friends, the ones who didn't come home. Lily got up from her chair, walked around the table, and climbed into his lap. She was getting too big for it, all knees and elbows, but she did it anyway, because some things aren't about fitting, they're about holding on. Tell me about them, she said. So he did. For the first time in 12 years, Ethan talked about Reaper 9. He told her about Sergeant Mike Dawson, who could fix anything mechanical and wanted to open a motorcycle shop when he got home. He told her about Corporal Jesse Vance, who carried pictures of his twin baby girls and sang country songs during long patrols. He told her about Private First Class Tommy Lou, who was 21 years old and wrote poetry that nobody knew about until they found his journal. He told her about Staff Sergeant Ben Crawford, who had a laugh so loud it could shake the walls of a bunker, and who always saved the last piece of whatever food he had for someone else. And the fifth one? Lily asked. Lieutenant Aaron Pike. He was my best friend. We went through training together. He was the one who pulled me out when the building collapsed. He got me halfway to the extraction point before... Ethan stopped. His jaw worked. His eyes were wet, but he didn't let the tears fall. He'd learned to hold them a long time ago, in a hospital bed, where crying made the burns hurt worse.
Before what, Dad?
Before he told me to keep going without him. He was hurt too bad. He knew he wasn't making it out, so he pushed me forward and said, "Go home to your girl, Ethan. That's an order." And I went. Lily pressed her face against his chest.
He sounds brave.
He was the bravest person I've ever known.
Braver than you?
100 times braver. All 5 of them were. I was just the one who got lucky.
That's not luck, Dad. That's because they wanted you to live. They chose you.
Ethan held his daughter tighter. 9 years old, and she understood something that therapists had tried to explain to him for a decade. Survivor's guilt isn't about deserving to live. It's about honoring the people who made sure you did. You're too smart for 9, you know that?
I know. It's a burden.
He laughed, a cracked, wet laugh that turned into something else halfway through. Not quite a sob, not quite a release. Something in between that had been building for 12 years. Lily held on. She didn't say anything else. She just held on. After a while, Ethan carried her to her room. She was already half asleep. He tucked her in, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and sat on the edge of her bed.
Dad?
Yeah?
I'm glad you came home.
Me too, kid.
And Dad?
Yeah?
You're still my hero, even when you smell like bleach.
He kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. Big week ahead. He walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and opened his notebook. The same notebook Victoria had mocked. The same notebook that held the architecture of a system worth billions. He turned to a blank page and wrote 5 names. Mike Dawson, Jesse Vance, Tommy Lou, Ben Crawford, Aaron Pike. Underneath, he wrote a single line. Monday. We finish this. For all of you. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and sat in the dark for a long time, not sleeping, not thinking, just breathing. The way a man breathes when he's been carrying something heavy for a very long time and is almost, not quite, but almost, ready to set it down. Monday came with rain. Ethan was at the building by 4:30 a.m., half an hour earlier than usual. He parked the truck in the back lot, grabbed his mop and bucket from the bed, and walked through the service entrance. The hallways were dark and empty. His footsteps echoed against the marble, the same marble he'd been scrubbing for 5 years. The same marble that Victoria's heels cracked against like gunshots every morning. He mopped the lobby first, then the staircase, then the corridor outside Conference Room A. He worked the way he always worked, slow, thorough, precise. Every stroke of the mop deliberate, every corner clean. He wasn't thinking about the generals, or the demonstration, or the billions of dollars at stake. He was thinking about the 5 names he'd written in his notebook last night. At 5:15, Carl arrived. He found Ethan in the corridor and stopped. "You're early." "I'm always early." "You nervous?" "I don't get nervous. I get ready." Carl leaned against the wall. Victoria's team worked all weekend. They restored the original detection parameters on every deployed system, all 14. The field teams confirmed calibration last night. The systems are back to full sensitivity. All 14? All 14, including the 3 schools. Ethan nodded. He kept mopping. "She also did something else," Carl said. "She called every facility that has an iron fire installation, personally. Every hospital administrator, every school principal, every military base commander. She told them about the sensitivity reduction and what it meant. She apologized to each one. Ethan stopped mopping. She called them herself? Every single one. Took her 2 days. The principal at Lincoln Elementary, my daughter's school, he told me Victoria cried on the phone. Said she kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't understand what she'd done. Ethan leaned on the mop handle. He stared at the floor he'd just cleaned.
Her father would have done the same thing.
You think she's ready? I think she's choosing to be. That's more than most people do. Carl pushed off the wall. The generals are arriving at 9, Briggs confirmed. Full delegation, same as last time. Ethan, Victoria asked me to tell you again. She wants you in the room. I know. Are you going to be in the room? Ethan wrung out the mop and set it against the wall. He looked at his hands, cracked, scarred, stained with years of bleach and floor wax and honest work. The hands of a janitor. The hands of a soldier. The hands that had carried a colonel out of a fire and written an algorithm that saved thousands of lives. Yeah, he said. I'll be in the room. The generals arrived at 8:55. 7 of them, same as before, same uniforms, same bearing, same gravity. General Briggs was last through the door, just like the first time. He scanned the room and found Ethan standing near the back wall, still in his gray custodial uniform, his tool bag at his feet. Their eyes met. Briggs gave a small nod. Ethan returned it. Victoria entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She looked different. Not in her clothes or her hair or her posture. Those were the same. It was her face. Something behind it had shifted. The hardness was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Something that looked like it hurt. She walked to the podium and set down her notes. Then she looked at the room, the generals, the executives, the engineers, the media representatives who'd been invited to witness what was supposed to be Sentinel's triumphant second chance. She didn't touch her notes. Before we begin the demonstration, she said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. The room went still. 10 days ago, I stood in this room and presented the Iron Fire system as the future of fire suppression technology. I told you it was developed by our engineering team. I told you all patents belong to Sentinel. Both of those statements were lies. Murmurs rippled through the room. Victoria's CFO, Richard Phelps, who was sitting in the second row, went rigid. The core technology behind the Iron Fire system was not developed by Sentinel. It was written by a United States military officer during a combat operation in 2011. The patent was acquired by my mother through a transaction that the original inventor never authorized and never profited from. She paused. The media representatives were writing furiously. The generals sat motionless. Additionally, over the past 3 years, my engineering team, under my direct authorization, modified the original safety parameters to improve performance metrics for contract bids. Those modifications reduced the system's fire detection sensitivity by 30%. This means that 14 deployed Iron Fire systems in hospitals, military installations, and elementary schools have been operating below the safety standards we certified to federal regulators. Dead silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. As of this weekend, all 14 systems have been restored to their original detection parameters. I have personally contacted every facility affected and disclosed the modifications. I have also filed a voluntary disclosure with the Federal Safety Board and have requested a full independent audit of every Sentinel safety system currently in operation. Phelps stood up. Victoria, we discussed this with the board. You were not authorized to— Sit down, Richard. The authority in her voice was different from before. It wasn't the cold, commanding tone of a CEO protecting her empire. It was the raw, unshakable certainty of a woman who had finally decided what she stood for. Phelps sat down.
I'm telling you this, Victoria continued, because you deserve to know the truth before you make any decisions about working with this company. And because the man who wrote this technology, the man who should have been standing at this podium from the beginning, is in this room right now.
Every head turned. They looked at the executives, the engineers, the military liaison officers. Nobody looked at the janitor standing against the back wall. Nobody except General Briggs. "Captain Ethan Ward," Briggs said, rising to his feet. "Reaper 9 Special Operations Unit, United States Army." The room turned to Ethan, the janitor in the gray uniform with a tool bag at his feet. Confusion spread across faces, executives looking at each other, media representatives craning their necks, generals frowning. Captain Ward led a 6-man team into a burning command post during Operation Emberline on December 28, 2011, Briggs continued. The mission was classified at the highest level. 5 team members were killed. Captain Ward sustained burns to 60% of his body and spinal injuries from a collapsing structure. He carried the wounded commanding officer, Colonel Richard Hale, Miss Hale's father, through enemy fire to the extraction point. Briggs' voice was steady, but his eyes were bright. While recovering from his injuries, Captain Ward wrote the fire suppression algorithm that became the foundation of the Iron Fire system. That code has since been deployed in facilities across this country and has saved thousands of lives. Captain Ward never received credit, compensation, or recognition for his work. Briggs turned to Ethan. Instead, he took a job as a janitor in this building, the building that was built on his technology, so that he could quietly ensure his code was never compromised in ways that would endanger human life. He's been doing that for 5 years. The room was so quiet that Ethan could hear the rain against the windows. Victoria stepped away from the podium. "Ethan, will you come up here?" He didn't move for a moment. Every eye in the room was on him. The man in the gray uniform. The man they'd all walked past 100 times without seeing. Then he picked up his tool bag, walked to the front of the room, and set the bag on the floor beside the podium. He didn't step behind the podium. He stood next to it, in the open, exactly as he was. No suit, no title, just a janitor with a tattoo on his wrist and a tool bag at his feet. "I'm not going to give a speech," he said. His voice was calm and even. The voice of a man who'd said what needed to be said in bunkers and hospitals and maintenance closets, and didn't need a microphone to be heard. "I'm not good at speeches. I'm good at fixing things." He reached into his tool bag and pulled out a USB drive. He walked to the main console and plugged it in. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the speed and precision of someone who'd written every line of code in the system. Because he had. He typed 6 commands. The screen behind him went dark for 2 seconds. Then it came alive. Green lights. Across the entire display, every sensor, every detector, every protocol. All green, all functioning. Full sensitivity, full range, full protection. The Iron Fire system was designed to detect 4 indicators simultaneously, Ethan said, turning to face the generals. Temperature, smoke density, oxygen displacement, and carbon monoxide concentration. When all 4 are monitored together, the system can detect a fire within 4.7 seconds of ignition, including slow burn fires that spread through walls, wiring, and insulation. The kind of fires that kill people in their sleep. He pointed at the screen. What you're looking at right now is the original Emberline architecture, fully restored. No modifications, No shortcuts.
No sensitivity reductions. This is what I wrote it to do. This is what it should have been doing all along.
General Briggs spoke. Captain Ward, the Pentagon would like to offer you a position as Senior Advisor on Military Safety Systems. Full clearance, full compensation. A chance to... Thank you, General, but I already have a job. Mopping floors? Keeping people safe. That's always been the job. The mop is just the tool. A reporter in the front row called out, Mr. Ward, you could have exposed all of this years ago. You could have gone to the media, filed lawsuits, destroyed this company. Why didn't you? Ethan looked at the reporter. Because destroying the company would have meant destroying the systems that are protecting people right now. Every hospital, every school, every military base with an iron fire installation. Those systems are saving lives today. If I'd burn the company down, those systems go offline. People die. The goal was never revenge. The goal was making sure the technology works the way it was supposed to. But surely you want recognition for what you've done. Compensation. Justice. Ethan reached into his tool bag again and pulled out a folder. He opened it and held up photographs. Dozens of them. Smiling faces. Wedding pictures. Graduation ceremonies. A firefighter holding his newborn. An elderly woman blowing out birthday candles. A child running across a playground. These are people who are alive because of the Emberline Code. Firefighters who went home to their families. Children who walked out of buildings that would have killed them. Grandparents who got to see another Christmas. He set the folder on the podium. This is my compensation. This is my justice. Every one of these faces is worth more than any patent or paycheck or job title. The room was silent. Victoria stepped forward. Ethan, Mr. Ward, I have a proposal. He turned to her. I'd like to offer you the position of Chief Safety Officer at Sentinel Defense. Full authority over all safety systems. Complete oversight of every project. If you find a problem, we fix it. No exceptions. No cost analysis. No board approval required. Your word is final. And when I find problems that cost money to fix, we fix them, no matter what they cost. And when your board pushes back, then I remind them that the alternative is a federal investigation, criminal charges, and a dead child on their conscience. Ethan looked at her for a long time. He saw the woman who'd thrown his mop, who'd mocked his notebook, who'd called him a failure in front of generals. But he also saw something else, something new, something fragile, something that looked like the beginning of the person her father had hoped she'd become. I'll take the job, he said. One condition. Name it. I keep the uniform. He looked down at his gray custodial clothes. Because the day I stop being willing to get on my knees and clean a floor is the day I stop understanding what service actually means. The first person to stand was General Briggs. He rose to his feet, squared his shoulders, and raised his hand in a salute. Not the casual kind, the full, crisp, parade ground salute that a 3-star general gives to a superior officer. The other generals stood, one by one, all 6 of them, hands raised, saluting the janitor. Then Carl stood, then the engineers, then the media representatives, then Victoria's executives, even Phelps, whose face was white, but who understood that this moment was bigger than stock prices and quarterly reports. Victoria was the last one standing. She didn't salute. She walked to Ethan, stood in front of him, and said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "Thank you for saving my father, for protecting me, for not giving up on me when I gave you every reason to. Your father asked me to watch over you.
I told him I would.
I don't break promises. I know that now. Ethan looked at the room full of people on their feet. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He didn't do any of the things a person is supposed to do when a room full of powerful people finally sees them. He just stood there, in his gray uniform, with his tool bag at his feet, and let the moment be what it was. Then he picked up the tool bag and turned to leave. "Where are you going?" Victoria asked. "The East Wing bathrooms need attention, and the third-floor break room is out of paper towels." "Ethan, you just became chief safety officer of a billion-dollar defense company. You don't have to clean bathrooms anymore." He stopped at the door and turned around. "Miss Hale, I've been cleaning up messes my whole life. Some of them were on floors. Some of them were in fire suppression code. Some of them were in the hearts of people who forgot what it means to serve others. The tool changes. The job doesn't." He walked out. The room watched him go. And for the first time in the history of Sentinel Defense Corporation, every single person in that building knew the name of the janitor. 1 year later, Ethan walked with Lily past the new headquarters. The building looked the same from the outside, glass and steel and money. But the sign above the entrance had changed. It now read, "Ward and Sentinel Systems." Lily pointed at it. "Dad, that's your name." "That's our name, kid." Inside the lobby, a framed photograph hung on the main wall. Ethan in his military uniform, younger, unburned, standing with 5 other soldiers in combat gear. Below the photograph, a brass plaque read, "The floor we walk on was cleaned by honor. In memory of Reaper 9, Mike Dawson, Jesse Vance, Tommy Liu, Ben Crawford, Aaron Pike." Lily stood in front of the photo for a long time. She knew the names now. Her father had told her their stories, all of them, even the parts that made his voice break. She knew about Sergeant Dawson's motorcycle shop dream. She knew about Corporal Vance's twin girls. She knew about Private Lou's secret poetry. She knew about Staff Sergeant Crawford's laugh that could shake a bunker. And she knew about Lieutenant Pike, her father's best friend, who had pushed him toward home with his last breath. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Do they know? Your friends? Do they know you kept your promise?" Ethan looked at the photograph. 5 faces frozen in time. 5 men who would never grow old, never see their children graduate, never fix a neighbor's water spigot on a quiet evening. "Yeah, kid. They know." "How?" "Because a promise doesn't disappear when the people you made it to are gone. It gets louder. It gets heavier. And it doesn't let you rest until you've done everything you said you would." Lily took his hand. Her fingers were small against his scarred palm. "You can rest now, Dad." Ethan squeezed her hand. He looked at the lobby, the clean floors, the polished walls, the photograph of his brothers. He looked at his daughter, who had her mother's smile and the kind of wisdom that comes from growing up in a house where integrity wasn't a word on a poster, but a way of life. "Not yet," he said. "There's still work to do." "There's always work to do." "That's right. And the day I stop believing that is the day I stop being the man your mother married and the soldier your grandfather trusted." They walked through the lobby together. Employees nodded at Ethan as he passed, not with the dismissive indifference of people ignoring a janitor, but with the quiet respect of people who knew exactly who he was and what he'd sacrificed. He still wore the gray uniform. He still carried the tool bag. He still showed up at 4:30 every morning and cleaned the lobby before anyone else arrived. Not because he had to, because the work mattered. Because every floor he mopped and every bathroom he cleaned was a reminder that no job is beneath a person who understands what service means. They reached the front door. Lily let go of his hand and ran ahead to the sidewalk. spinning in the evening light, the way 9-year-olds do when the world feels safe and their dad is right behind them. Ethan stood in the doorway and looked back at the lobby one last time. The photograph, the plaque, the 5 names. His left wrist caught the light from the glass ceiling, and the tattoo flared. R9-VIRE-1128. As vivid and permanent as the day it was inked into his skin. He thought about Colonel Hale, who had believed in him. He thought about the 5 men who had died believing in each other. He thought about Victoria, who was learning to believe in something bigger than profit. He thought about Carl, who had risked his career because his daughter's safety mattered more than his paycheck. He thought about Mr. Kowalski and his broken water spigot. He thought about Lily and her homework and her cartoon star blanket and the way she said, "You're my hero," like it was the simplest, truest thing in the world. And he thought about himself, a man who had been burned, broken, stolen from, mocked, overlooked, and dismissed. A man who had been declared dead by his own government, robbed by a commanding officer he trusted, and humiliated by the daughter of the man he'd saved. A man who had every reason in the world to be bitter and angry and defeated. A man who chose, every single day, to pick up the mop anyway. "Dad, come on," Lily called from the sidewalk. "You're so slow." Ethan smiled. He stepped through the door and into the evening light, where his daughter was waiting, where the work was never finished, and where a promise made in fire burned as bright as the day it was spoken. Some people wait their whole lives for the world to recognize them. Ethan Ward never waited.
He just kept cleaning. Floors, systems, consciences, until the world had no choice but to look down at the man on his knees and realize he'd been holding everything up the entire time.